Hi everyone, welcome to day 11 of 100 days 100 Java interview questions series. If you are appearing for backend roles, you might see interviewer asking the Spring Boot application architecture. So let's try to understand it without any further ado. So if you see this diagram, in this diagram what I have done, I have represented 5 different components. The first component is the client, which is basically your browser. Then we have the controller, and then we have the service layer component. The another component is the repository, and the last component is the database. So let's go through each and every component one by one. So just understand it like that: the client is your browser from where the request is originating. Once request originates from the client, basically what happens in Spring Boot, the request reaches to the DispatcherServlet. Now it's the responsibility of DispatcherServlet to route the request to the specific controller. So let's say you have many controllers, so it's the responsibility of DispatcherServlet to route the request to the specific controller. Now once request reaches to the controller, what controller does, controller basically map the request with the specific methods annotated with let's say get mapping, put mapping, post mapping. And on top of that, what it does some kind of validations on at the controller layer, and then pass the request to the service layer. Now once the service layer request reaches to the service layer, it mainly plays an important role in the data translation or the data manipulation. So whatever the business logic we write, we basically write at this layer. So in responsibility of service layer is to interact with the repository layer, get the data from there, and then manipulate the data based on the eligible business rules. Apart from that, in case if we want to interact with any other downstream services, so it is more recommended to call that downstream service from the service layer itself. Now as soon as the request leaves the service layer, it reaches to the repository layer. Now in repository layer, it mainly deals with the database. Basically it interacts with the database and perform the CRUD operations via JPA repositories as well as the native queries, whatever you will write. Okay, so the main responsibility of repository layer is to interact with the database and perform the CRUD operations. Now the last component is the database, okay, where your data is present. So if I take an example, so let's say if you are trying to get the list of user details, what will happen? First of all, request goes to the DispatcherServlet, then from DispatcherServlet it will come to the controller. Basically map the request with the specific method which is annotated with, let's say, @get mapping. Then from there the request leaves the controller and reaches to service layer. It does some manipulation over there, whatever required as per the business rules, and then pass the request back to the repository layer. In repository layer, we basically interact with the database. We basically fetches all the user details, then pass it back to the repository layer. Repository layer pass that user details to the service layer. Again, if required, service layer will does some kind of manipulation, and then it will pass the response back to the controller, and the controller will return the response to the client. So that's all about the Spring Boot architecture flow diagram. If you have any queries, please do let me know in the comment section. That's all for today. Thank you so much.